Hello and welcome. If the D315OA exam has been on your mind and you're wondering how to approach it, then you're in the right place. Our website has D315OA questions and answers, and it won't cost you a thing. OA exams are tough, so everything from guides to practice questions is free. With over 100 plus success stories, we have proven our videos will help you pass your exam on the first attempt. In this video, we will cover questions from network topologies, OSI model, hardware infrastructure, network protocols, data transmission. So, let's get started.
Question 1. A small medical clinic stores patient health records on a server. The clinic wants to ensure that records cannot be read by unauthorized employees, cannot be altered without trace, and remain accessible to authorized staff during business hours. Which framework best captures these three requirements? Your options are A. The 8OA framework of authentication, authorization, and accounting. B. The defense in-depth model of layered controls. C. The CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. D. The NIST cybersecurity framework of identify, protect, and detect. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is C. The CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. C is correct because the CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability directly maps to the three requirements described. Confidentiality prevents unauthorized reading. Integrity prevents undetected alteration. And availability ensures access during business hours. A is wrong because AA focuses on user identity processes rather than the three security objectives for data itself. Authentication, authorization, and accounting describe how access is controlled and logged, not what is being protected. B is wrong because defense in-depth describe a strategy of layered protective controls, not the security objectives those controls aim to achieve. It explains how to defend rather than what aspects of security to defend. D is wrong because the NIST framework structures security activities into phases like identify and protect, but it is broader than the specific data protection objectives listed in the scenario. The CIA triad is the foundational framework information security professionals use to define what every security control is ultimately protecting. Understanding each pillar separately is essential because each one demands its own distinct family of controls. Confidentiality keeps data away from unauthorized eyes. Integrity ensures data cannot be altered by anyone who lacks permission to change it. Availability guarantees that systems and data remain reachable for the people who legitimately need them. Mechanically, each pillar is enforced differently. Confidentiality relies on encryption and access controls. Integrity depends on hashing and digital signatures. Availability is supported by redundant hardware, offsite backups, and denial of service protection. Picture a credit union data center. Full disk encryption handles confidentiality. Cryptographic checksums on transaction logs protect integrity. And a hot standby site in another city ensures availability during outages. Each control answers a completely different question. Encryption alone does not cover all three properties. It addresses confidentiality and with message authentication codes, integrity, but does nothing for availability. The triad demands that practitioners treat each property as a separate concern with its own deliberate controls. Question 2. A financial services firm encrypts customer account statements before storing them in a cloud database, and only senior accountants hold the decryption keys. Which pillar of the CIA triad is this control most directly enforcing? Your options are A. Confidentiality, B. Integrity, C. Availability, D. Accountability. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A, confidentiality. A is correct because encryption combined with restricted key access ensures that only authorized senior accountants can read the statements. This is the textbook definition of confidentiality, where sensitive data remains hidden from unauthorized viewers. B is wrong because integrity addresses whether data has been altered or tampered with, typically through hashing or digital signatures, rather than whether it can be read. C is wrong because availability concerns whether authorized users can access data when needed. Encryption does not directly address uptime or access reliability. D is wrong because accountability tracks who performed what action and is not one of the three core pillars of the CIA triad. Confidentiality is the security objective focused on controlling who can read information. It sits on a spectrum from fully public data to the most tightly restricted secrets, and it applies in both physical and digital environments. Three mechanisms work together to enforce confidentiality at scale. Identity tells the system who is asking for access. Classification tells it how sensitive the data is. And cryptography ensures the content stays unreadable even if storage or network traffic is intercepted. Modern confidentiality controls fall into four families. Access controls restrict who can open a resource. Encryption renders data unintelligible without a key. Classification policies tag data so the right rules apply. And monitoring detects unauthorized access attempts. A robust system layers all four because any single control can fail on its own. Consider a hospital storing radiology images. The disk is encrypted via a hardware security module. The application verifies each radiologist's identity before returning images, and network traffic runs over an encrypted channel. Each layer addresses a different way confidentiality could be lost. No single failure exposes the data. A critical nuance: denying access to a file server is not enough. If data is not encrypted at rest, someone with physical access to the storage device can still read it. Strong confidentiality demands both access controls and encryption working together. Question 3. A hospital uses cryptographic hashing on patient medication records and verifies the hash before any prescription is dispensed. If a record's hash no longer matches the stored reference, the dispensing system halts and alerts the pharmacist. Which pillar of the CIA triad is being protected? Your options are A. Confidentiality through hash-based encryption. B. Availability through automated record verification. C. Accountability through transaction logging. D. Integrity through tamper detection. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is D. Integrity through tamper detection. D is correct because hashing creates a fixed value that changes if any data is altered. By comparing current hash values to known good ones, the hospital can detect tampering, which is the goal of integrity protection. A is wrong because hashing is not encryption, because it is one way and cannot be reversed to reveal data. Confidentiality requires actual encryption with reversible decryption. B is wrong because halting the dispensing system actually reduces availability when a mismatch is found, so this is not the primary goal of the control. C is wrong because accountability identifies who took an action, not whether the data itself was modified. Hash mismatches reveal change without identifying the source. Integrity is the security property that guarantees data has not been altered between when it was written and when it is read. It answers a specific question. Can you trust that what you see is exactly what was originally authored? That trust is built on mathematical guarantees, not assumptions. Data integrity can be threatened in three distinct ways: bits flipping during noisy network transmission, malware modifying files inside a compromised system, or an insider with access altering records deliberately. The integrity property does not care which source caused the change, only that any change is detectable. The core mechanism is the cryptographic hash function. It takes an input of any length and produces a fixed length digest. Any single bit change in the input produces a completely different digest. By comparing a hash computed at write time against one recomputed at read time, systems can detect tampering instantly. A critical nuance: hashing does not encrypt anything. The input remains readable. The hash simply sits beside it as a verification value. Encryption hides content, hashing detects change. Many systems combine both, but on an exam, confusing one for the other leads to choosing the wrong control for the scenario. Integrity is commonly confused with three neighboring properties. Confidentiality controls who can see data. Authenticity, the extra guarantee a digital signature adds, asks who created it. Availability asks whether data is reachable at all. When a system halts because an integrity check fails, availability is sacrificed to defend integrity, and that trade-off is itself the exam clue. Question 4. An online retailer experiences a denial of service attack on Black Friday that prevents customers from completing purchases for several hours. Which pillar of the CIA triad has been most directly compromised? Your options are: A. Confidentiality, because customer data exposure increased. B. Availability, because authorized users could not access the service. C. Integrity, because transaction records were altered. D. Authenticity, because user identities could not be verified. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is B. Availability, because authorized users could not access the service. B is correct because availability ensures that system and data remain accessible to authorized users when needed. A denial of service attack specifically targets and undermines availability by overwhelming the service. A is wrong because a denial of service attack does not typically expose data. It blocks access rather than steals information, so confidentiality is not the primary concern. C is wrong because there is no indication that transaction records were altered. The attack prevented transactions from occurring, not from being recorded falsely. D is wrong because authenticity verifies whether a user or message is genuine. The attack did not impersonate users, it simply made the service unreachable. Availability is the CIA triad property that ensures data and services remain reachable when users need them. While it often gets less attention than confidentiality and integrity, its loss is the most immediately visible to users and the most costly to a business. Attackers learned early that destroying a service is often more profitable than stealing data. A criminal can extort a target, a political adversary can silence a publisher, and a competitor can grab market share by disrupting a rival at a critical moment. Availability controls fall into two families: redundancy, covering power, servers and databases, and capacity protection, which includes rate limiting, traffic scrubbing, and content distribution networks. Mature programs combine both, so a failure on either axis still leaves a working service. Picture an online retailer running across 3 data centers on 2 continents. When a botnet floods one region, the routing layer pulls it from rotation and surviving regions absorb the load. Customers see slightly higher latency but no outright failure. That is geographic redundancy, turning a catastrophe into a footnote. Availability is distinct from reliability and performance. Reliability is the long-term average of how often a system works. Availability is the moment-by-moment ability to respond. Performance is how fast it responds when it does. On an exam, availability is the answer when the scenario asks whether the service can respond at all, not how well. Question 5. A university implements digital signatures on academic transcripts so that any change after issuance becomes visible to the verifier, and the issuing office can be confirmed. Transcripts then travel to employers through public channels. Which two CIA-related properties does this control combine? Your options are A. Confidentiality and availability. B. Availability and accountability. C. Integrity and authenticity. D. Confidentiality and integrity. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is C. Integrity and authenticity. C is correct because A. Digital signature both proves who issued the document, which is authenticity, and reveals any subsequent change, which is integrity. Both properties are present in this control by design. A is wrong because confidentiality is not provided because the transcript is sent through public channels without encryption. Availability concerns access rather than tamper detection. B is wrong because availability concerns whether the transcript is reachable, not whether it has been altered. Accountability is broader than authenticity and is not the standard pairing for digital signatures. D is wrong because confidentiality is not part of this scenario because the transcript travels publicly. Only the signature is verifiable, not the content's secrecy. A digital signature is a cryptographic construction that proves two things at once: who produced a piece of data and whether it has been altered since signing. This is the foundation of non-repudiation in modern systems. The mechanism has 3 steps. First, the signer hashes the message. Second, that hash is encrypted with the signer's private key to produce the signature. Third, any recipient can decrypt the signature using the signer's public key. Recompute the hash and compare. If the values match, both origin and integrity are confirmed. Signatures uniquely combine 3 guarantees. They confirm the origin of the data, verify it has not been altered, and establish non-repudiation, meaning the signer cannot later deny having produced it. The most common exam confusion is between digital signatures and message authentication codes. A Mac uses a shared symmetric key, so any holder of that key could have produced it. There is no non-repudiation. Signatures use asymmetric keys, so only the holder of the private key could have signed. One final point: signing a message does not hide it. The document remains readable to anyone who intercepts it. If a system needs both authenticity and confidentiality, it must both sign and encrypt. These are independent operations. Question 6. A security analyst is documenting weaknesses in an organization's web servers, the actors who might exploit those weaknesses, and the potential business loss if exploitation occurred. To use industry standard vocabulary correctly, how should the analyst label these 3 concepts? Your options are A. Vulnerability, threat, and risk. B. Risk, exploit, and impact. C. Threat, vulnerability, and incident. D. Asset, threat, and control. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is A. Vulnerability, threat, and risk. A is correct because a vulnerability is a weakness in a system. A threat is the actor or event that could exploit it. And risk is the potential loss when a threat exploits a vulnerability. The 3 terms are standard in information security frameworks. B is wrong because exploit is the specific tool or technique used to take advantage of a vulnerability, not the actor itself. Impact is part of risk calculation but not synonymous with risk. C is wrong because an incident is a confirmed security event that already occurred, not the potential damage. This ordering also reverses vulnerability and threat. D is wrong because an asset is what is being protected, not a weakness. A control is a safeguard which does not appear in the analyst's list. Security planning rests on 3 precise terms that are easy to confuse but critical to keep separate. Understanding how they relate to each other is what turns vague concern into actionable analysis. A vulnerability is the weakness. A threat is the actor or event that might exploit it. and risk is the potential business impact when a specific threat meets a specific vulnerability. Conflating these produces assessments that miss real problems. Risk only materializes when a threat and a vulnerability actually meet. A vulnerability with no threat is theoretical, and a threat facing a hardened system finds nothing to exploit. The magnitude of risk depends on both the likelihood of that meeting and the impact if it happens. Four terms are commonly confused. An exploit is the specific technique that takes advantage of a vulnerability. An incident is a confirmed event where exploitation occurred. And an asset is what you are protecting. Risk is none of these. It is the potential loss if threat and vulnerability converge. Tight vocabulary lets security teams compare options, prioritize budgets, and communicate trade-offs clearly to leaders. When you hear weakness or flaw, think vulnerability. When you hear actor or attacker, think threat. When you hear potential loss, think risk. Question 7. A network administrator notices that a database administrator who recently received a poor performance review has begun downloading large amounts of customer data outside normal business hours. Which threat category best describes this situation? Your options are A. Advanced persistent threat, B. Script kiddie activity, C. Hacktivist intrusion, D. Insider threat. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is D. Insider threat. D is correct because an insider threat involves a trusted individual with legitimate access who uses that access for malicious or unauthorized purposes. The disgruntled database administrator with valid credentials and unusual download patterns fits the profile precisely. A is wrong because an advanced persistent threat is a long-term, externally orchestrated intrusion, typically state-sponsored or organized criminal. The scenario involves an internal trusted employee, not external infiltration. B is wrong because script kiddies use pre-built tools to attack systems they have no legitimate access to. The actor here has authorized credentials and detailed knowledge of the database. C is wrong because hacktivists pursue political or ideological goals through external attacks. The motive in this scenario is personal grievance from inside the organization. Insider threats are a distinct security category where the risk comes not from outside attackers, but from people who already have legitimate access. Understanding what makes insiders dangerous, named, and hard to catch is essential for any security model. Insiders fall into two broad types: malicious insiders who deliberately exploit their access, and negligent insiders who cause harm through carelessness. In both cases, the activity can look identical to routine authorized work, which is exactly why detection is so difficult. What makes insiders especially dangerous is the variety of mechanisms available to them. A finance analyst, a database administrator, a network engineer, or a help desk technician. Each can use their authorized capabilities in ways that are nearly indistinguishable from legitimate activity. A critical distinction: an insider threat involves a real authorized person acting outside their role, while an external attacker using stolen credentials typically shows behavioral anomalies, like logins from unfamiliar geographies or unusual hours. Behavioral analytics tools are designed to catch that second pattern. A security model that only guards the perimeter misses a large share of real-world risk. When a scenario describes a trusted employee, contractor, or privileged user acting outside the spirit of their role, the insider threat framing is almost always correct. Question 8. A small online forum is defaced overnight with a politically charged message and a link to a manifesto. No data is exfiltrated and no further attacks follow. Which attacker type is most consistent with this behavior? Your options are A. Organized cybercrime syndicate, B. Hacktivist, C. Nation-state actor. D. Insider with privileged access. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is B. Hacktivist. B is correct because hacktivists conduct attacks to promote a political or social message rather than to steal data or extort money. Defacing a website with a manifesto matches that motive cleanly. A is wrong because organized cybercrime focuses on financial gain through theft, fraud, or ransom. A defacement with no theft does not produce the revenue these groups pursue. C is wrong because nation-state actors prioritize espionage, infrastructure disruption, or long-term access. A loud public defacement with a manifesto would compromise the stealth they require. D is wrong because an insider attack typically leverages access for personal benefit or sabotage, not public ideological messaging on a low-value target. Hacktivists are a distinct threat actor category defined not by their tools, but by their motive. Unlike criminals who chase money or nation-states who pursue intelligence, hacktivists use cyber operations to amplify a political or ideological message. Their preferred techniques: website defacement, public data dumps, and denial of service attacks are chosen for visibility and immediate impact rather than stealth. The goal is to embarrass the target and push the message into mainstream media coverage. Hacktivists sit between organized cybercrime and nation-state actors in resources and sophistication. Criminals prioritize stealth to monetize access. Nation-states invest heavily in avoiding attribution. Hacktivists prioritize being loud. The message itself is the end goal. On an exam, the key test is motive. Is the attacker pursuing money, intelligence, or ideological visibility? Watch for signal words like manifesto, defacement, coordinated protest, and cause-based attack, paired with no financial or espionage objective. Remember, a hacktivist operation can be technically sophisticated or modest. Skill level does not define the category, ideology does. When the attack is loud, public, and message-driven with no apparent financial gain, hacktivism is the correct classification. Question 9. A vulnerability scanner flags a web server because it runs an outdated version of an open-source cryptography library with a publicly documented flaw and an available fix. The administrator has not yet applied the fix. What category of vulnerability is this? Your options are A. Unpatched software vulnerability, B. Misconfiguration vulnerability, C. Zero-day vulnerability, D. Physical security vulnerability. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is A. Unpatched software vulnerability. A is correct because a publicly documented flaw with an available patch that has not been applied is the textbook unpatched software vulnerability. The defining traits are public disclosure, a vendor fix, and a system still running the old version. B is wrong because a misconfiguration involves wrong settings on otherwise current software. The server's settings are not the issue, its software version is outdated. C is wrong because zero-day vulnerabilities are unknown to the vendor and have no patch yet. A documented flaw with an available patch is the opposite of a zero-day. D is wrong because physical security concerns access to hardware, locks, and facilities, not software version status. Unpatched software vulnerabilities are one of the most common and well understood risk categories in cybersecurity, solved, and yet they remain the leading cause of successful breaches year after year. The reason isn't technical, it's operational. The risk window opens the moment a vendor publishes a fix. Attackers read security advisories within hours and develop exploit code targeting systems where the patch hasn't been installed. The longer that window stays open, the greater the exposure. When a flaw is found, vendors assign a CVE identifier and release a fix. Attackers use that same public record to target unpatched systems. The patch management race is won by whichever side moves faster, and historically, attackers move faster unless patching is automated. Exam questions often test whether you can distinguish unpatched vulnerabilities from 0 days and misconfigurations. Unpatched means a fix is available but wasn't installed. 0 day means no fix exists yet. Misconfiguration means the software is current but set up incorrectly. Conflating these leads to the wrong remediation. Signal words like outdated version, missing patch, known exploit, or available fix not applied all point to this category. If a scenario mentions a public disclosure and an unapplied fix, unpatched vulnerabilities is your answer. Question 10. An organization sorts its security threats and decides to address first the ones that combine high likelihood with high impact on revenue generating systems. What approach is being applied? Your options are A. Threat hunting, B. Penetration testing, C. Risk-based prioritization, D. Continuous monitoring. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. Risk-based prioritization. C is correct because risk-based prioritization ranks threats by combining likelihood and impact, then directs resources to the highest risk items first. The scenario describes that exact reasoning. A is wrong because threat hunting actively searches for adversary presence already in the environment. It does not concern the planning step of selecting which threats to address first. B is wrong because penetration testing simulates attacks to find weaknesses. The scenario is about selecting priorities, not running tests. D is wrong because continuous monitoring is an ongoing operational activity. It does not by itself rank threats by business impact. Risk-based prioritization is how security teams decide which problems to fix first by combining two factors: how likely a weakness is to be exploited, and how damaging that exploitation would be to the business. Likelihood captures attacker interest, available exploit code, and system exposure to untrusted networks. Impact captures data sensitivity, revenue dependence, regulatory risk, and recovery cost. These two estimates combine into a single risk score that drives the work queue. The outputs are often plotted on a simple matrix. Likelihood on one axis, impact on the other, with action thresholds for each quadrant. Items landing in the high likelihood, high impact corner get addressed first, regardless of the abstract severity score. Severity scores measure how bad a vulnerability is technically without knowing your environment. Asset-based ranking values systems but ignores the threats facing them. Compliance checklists treat every finding as equally urgent. Risk-based prioritization replaces all three with a deliberate, environment-specific ranking tied to actual business exposure. Threat hunting, pen testing, and continuous monitoring all feed data into this process. But risk-based prioritization is the decision layer that turns those inputs into a ranked work plan leadership can fund and act on. Question 11. A web application slows to a crawl and then becomes unreachable. Logs show a flood of traffic arriving from thousands of compromised home routers simultaneously. Which type of attack is most likely occurring? Your options are A. SQL injection, B. Distributed denial of service attack, C. Cross-site scripting, D. Privilege escalation. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B. Distributed denial of service attack. B is correct because a distributed denial of service attack uses many compromised systems, often forming a botnet, to overwhelm a target with traffic. The pattern of thousands of routers sending traffic simultaneously matches this attack precisely. A is wrong because SQL injection manipulates database queries through crafted user input, producing data exposure or modification rather than a traffic flood from many sources. C is wrong because cross-site scripting injects malicious scripts into web pages viewed by other users. It does not produce mass traffic volume from external sources. D is wrong because privilege escalation moves an attacker from a lower privilege account to a higher one. It is typically silent rather than visible as a traffic spike. A distributed denial of service attack works by flooding a target with more traffic than it can handle. But what makes it uniquely dangerous is the word distributed. Understanding that single word unlocks the whole concept. Every DDoS attack has three components: a botnet of compromised devices, an amplification technique that multiplies traffic output, and a target whose bandwidth, connection state, or application layer gets fully saturated. The attacker controls thousands of compromised devices through command and control infrastructure. Each device sends modest traffic, but together they produce a flood indistinguishable from a worldwide surge of legitimate visitors, making filtering extremely difficult. Exam questions often test whether you can tell a DDoS apart from lookalikes. A flash crowd shares the same symptoms but involves real visitors with no malicious intent. A single source attack comes from one address and is easy to block. A misconfiguration causes an outage with no external traffic at all. The clearest signal of a distributed attack is the combination of high traffic volume and a wide spread of source addresses showing no normal browsing behavior. When you see those two traits together, DDoS is the right framing. Question 12. An attacker sits on an unsecured coffee shop Wi-Fi network and intercepts session cookies being sent between a customer's laptop and an online banking site. The attacker can then read and modify traffic in both directions. Which attack is being described? Your options are A. Phishing attack, B. Ransomware infection, C. Brute force attack, D. Man-in-the-middle attack. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. Man-in-the-middle attack. D is correct because a man-in-the-middle attack places the attacker between two communicating parties, allowing both interception and modification of traffic in transit. Unsecured public Wi-Fi is a classic vector for this attack. A is wrong because phishing tricks users into revealing credentials or clicking malicious links. It does not require positioning between the user and the legitimate site. B is wrong because ransomware encrypts a victim's files and demands payment for decryption. It does not involve intercepting traffic in transit. C is wrong because brute force attacks systematically try password combinations against an account. They do not involve sitting between two parties. A man-in-the-middle attack works by secretly inserting an attacker between two parties who each believe they are communicating directly with the other. The core assumption the attack breaks is that a packet traveling between two endpoints has not been observed or altered along the way. The attacker sits silently in the traffic stream, able to read, modify, or inject data in either direction. The two victims see a normal connection while every packet passes through hostile hands. The mechanism varies by layer. At the data link layer, ARP spoofing poisons address tables. At the network layer, a rogue DHCP server advertises the attacker as the gateway. At the wireless layer, a rogue access point mimics a trusted network name. At the transport layer, attackers strip or forge TLS certificates. The attack depends entirely on absent or weak authentication. Properly configured TLS with valid certificates, mutual authentication, or pinned public keys defeats it because the attacker cannot impersonate either endpoint without the correct private key. On exams, man in the middle is often confused with replay attacks and session hijacking. A replay attack resends a captured message later without being live in the conversation. Session hijacking steals a session identifier without sitting in the traffic stream. Only the man in the middle attacker is continuously present, enabling both real-time observation and manipulation. Question 13. An employee receives an email that appears to come from the IT help desk, asking them to verify their login credentials through a linked form. The email uses the company logo, but the sending domain is slightly misspelled. What attack is this? Your options are A. Phishing, B. Farming, C. Tailgating, D. Whaling. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. Phishing. A is correct because phishing uses fraudulent communication that impersonates a trusted source to trick recipients into revealing credentials or other sensitive information. The misspelled domain and credential request are textbook indicators. B is wrong because farming redirects users from a legitimate website to a fraudulent one through DNS manipulation. It does not involve a sender email at all. C is wrong because tailgating is a physical security attack where someone follows an authorized person through a secured door. It has no email component. D is wrong because whaling is a specific form of phishing targeting executives or other high-value individuals. A general employee target fits standard phishing more closely. Phishing is deceptive communication designed to trick people into handing over credentials, clicking malicious links, or opening dangerous attachments. Unlike most cyber attacks, phishing doesn't exploit software flaws, it exploits human psychology. Phishing comes in several forms. Bulk phishing blasts the same message to thousands hoping a few respond. Spear phishing customizes the message for one target, and whaling focuses that effort on high-value executives. Smishing and vishing shift the same deception to text messages and phone calls. Phishing and farming both end with the user on a malicious site, but the path differs. Phishing requires the victim to act on a deceptive message. Farming hijacks address resolution, so even a correctly typed URL leads somewhere dangerous. No deceptive message needed. Every phishing attempt relies on the same three levers: familiar logos and formal language to establish trust, urgency or fear to short-circuit careful thinking, and a call to action, a link or attachment that exposes the victim's credentials or access. When an exam scenario describes a suspicious email asking for credentials, an urgent action, or a misspelled domain, think phishing. The attack succeeds because people are convinced to act, and that's exactly what separates it from purely technical exploits. Question 14. A web application accepts a username in a login form. An attacker enters a value that includes a single quote and additional database query syntax, and the application returns the full user table. What attack succeeded? Your options are A. Cross-site scripting, B. Buffer overflow, C. SQL injection, D. Session hijacking. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. SQL injection. C is correct because SQL injection occurs when user input is concatenated into a database query without proper validation or parameterization. A single quote followed by query keywords can break out of the intended statement and return arbitrary data. A is wrong because cross-site scripting injects client-side scripts into pages other users view. It does not directly query the backend database. B is wrong because buffer overflow exploits memory boundaries in a program to overwrite adjacent memory. It does not return data through query syntax. D is wrong because session hijacking steals an active session identifier to impersonate a logged-in user. It does not require entering query syntax through a form field. SQL injection is one of the oldest and most persistent web application attacks. To understand why it works, we need to look at what happens when user input meets a database query. The mechanism follows a consistent shape. The application builds a query by combining a static template with user input. The attacker inserts a quote character that terminates the intended literal early, then appends extra clauses that change the query's meaning, because untrusted input is being treated as code rather than data. Instead of a safe parameterized binding, the raw string lands directly in the query engine. The database has no way to distinguish the developer's intended logic from the attacker's appended instructions, unless it simply executes whatever it receives. A critical distinction for exams: SQL injection targets the back-end database engine and produces data exposure, modification, or destruction. Cross-site scripting targets other users' browsers and produces session theft or content manipulation. Both are injection family attacks, but they have different impacts and completely different defenses. The root cause is always the same: unseparated data and code. Parameterized queries solve this by binding user input as a typed value the database never interprets as syntax, no matter what the attacker types. Question 15. A user opens an attachment that quietly installs software which logs every keystroke and sends those records to a remote server. What category of malware best describes this? Your options are or worm, B. spyware, C. ransomware, D. rootkit. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is B. Spyware. B is correct because spyware secretly observes user activity and sends that information to an external party. A keylogger that captures keystrokes and transmits them to a remote server fits the spyware category directly. A is wrong because a worm self-replicates across networks without user action. The defining trait is propagation, not surveillance of user input. C is wrong because ransomware encrypts files and demands payment for decryption. It does not specifically capture keystrokes. D is wrong because a rootkit hides the presence of other malware or grants persistent administrative access. It does not by itself perform keystroke logging, though it can hide a keylogger. Spyware is defined by one core behavior: watching what you do and quietly sending that information to someone else. Unlike ransomware or destructive malware, spyware succeeds only when you never know it's there. The category includes keyloggers that record every keystroke, screen capture tools, browser hijackers that monitor web activity, and information stealers that harvest credentials, cookies, and session tokens. Once installed, spyware establishes persistence through registry entries or scheduled tasks, silently collects targeted data, and transmits it over encrypted channels designed to blend in with normal web traffic. The key exam distinction is that rootkits are defined by hiding software, worms by spreading across networks, and Trojans by disguised delivery. Any of these can carry spyware as a payload, but only spyware is defined by the act of silent observation and reporting. When an exam scenario describes malware that watches and reports without disrupting, capturing keystrokes, exfiltrating credentials, tracking behavior, the answer is spyware. Question 16. A help desk technician is granted permission to reset user passwords, but is also given administrative rights over the database, the email server, and the financial application, even though those roles are not part of the job. Which security design principle has been violated? Your options are A. Defense in depth, B. Open design, C. Fail-safe default, D. Least privilege. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is D, least privilege. D is correct because least privilege requires that each user, process, or system be granted only the access strictly necessary to perform its function. Giving the technician rights far beyond password resets is a textbook violation. A is wrong because defense in depth refers to layering multiple controls so that a single failure does not compromise security. It is not directly about per user access scope. B is wrong because open design states that the security of a system should not depend on secrecy of its mechanism. It does not address how broadly access is granted. C is wrong because fail-safe defaults requires that access decisions default to denial. The violation here is about excessive granted access, not about default behavior. Least privilege is the principle that every user, process, and system component should receive exactly the permissions needed to do its job. Die takkes zijn altijd nothing more. It sounds simple, but over-granted permissions rarely cause visible problems until an attacker exploits them. The math is straightforward. When a broadly privileged account is compromised, the attacker inherits every one of those permissions. Limiting the footprint limits the blast radius. This is why mature security programs treat access review as an ongoing discipline, not a one-time project. 4 mutually reinforcing mechanisms keep the permission footprint small. Role-based access control groups writes by job function. Just-in-time access grants elevation only for the window a task requires. Privileged access management vaults, administrative credentials behind an approval workflow. Periodic access reviews confirm that held permissions are still needed. Access control is the broad category of who can do what. Least privilege is a specific principle about minimizing what each subject is allowed to do. A role-based access control system can violate least privilege if its roles are overscoped, and a discretionary system can satisfy it if owners grant only what is needed. Least privilege is frequently confused with 2 related concepts. Separation of duties splits a sensitive task across multiple people to prevent any one person from completing it alone. That addresses collusion, not blast radius. Role-based access control is a mechanism for organizing permissions, not a statement about how broad they should be. Only least privilege speaks directly to the size of the permission footprint. Question 17. A new file sharing system is being designed. By default, the development team decides that any folder created without an explicit access policy must reject all access requests until a policy is assigned. Which design principle does this enforce? Your options are A. Economy of mechanism, B. Separation of privilege, C. Fail-safe defaults, D. Complete mediation. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is C. Fail-safe defaults. C is correct because fail-safe defaults require that the default decision when permissions are missing or unclear is to deny access. The described default of rejecting access until a policy exists matches this principle exactly. A is wrong because economy of mechanism emphasizes keeping security designs as simple as possible. It does not specify what should happen when policy is absent. B is wrong because separation of privilege requires 2 or more conditions to grant access. The scenario involves one condition, the absence of a policy, not multiple required checks. D is wrong because complete mediation requires that every access attempt be checked. It addresses when checks happen, not what the default decision should be when no policy exists. Fail-safe defaults is the principle that any system should deny access whenever permissions or rules are unclear or missing. It's not just a preference, it's a deliberate design choice about what happens at the edges of your policy. When a rule is missing, a system either fails closed or fails open. Failing closed surfaces a visible error that operators can fix. Failing open allows silent, unauthorized access that may never be noticed, which is the far worse outcome. Fail-safe defaults mandates the fail-closed behavior. Mechanically, this principle appears in firewalls as an implicit deny at the bottom of every rule set. Any traffic not explicitly permitted is dropped. The same pattern appears in cloud identity systems, web authorization frameworks, and file system permissions. The absence of a rule means no access. Fail-safe defaults is often confused with complete mediation and least privilege. Complete mediation is about checking every access attempt against current policy. So, it's about when checks happen. Least privilege concerns the scope of permissions when rules do exist. Fail-safe defaults uniquely addresses what to do when no rule applies at all. The core insight is concise. Secure systems explicitly enumerate when access is permitted and deny everything else. When a scenario describes a control that refuses access in ambiguous situations rather than allowing it, fail-safe defaults is the principle at work. Question 18. A security architect designs an enterprise network with perimeter firewalls, internal segmentation, endpoint antivirus, multi-factor authentication, and continuous monitoring so that a failure or breach at one layer is caught by another. Which principle is being applied? Your options are A. Defense in depth, B. Least common mechanism, C. Psychological acceptability, D. Open design. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A. Defense in depth. A is correct because defense in depth places multiple independent layers of security controls so that an attacker who defeats one layer encounters another. The described combination of perimeter, network, endpoint, identity, and monitoring controls is textbook defense in depth. B is wrong because least common mechanism limits sharing of resources between users to reduce shared attack surface. It does not describe multiple layers of controls. C is wrong because psychological acceptability requires that controls be usable so people do not bypass them. It speaks to user experience rather than layer count. D is wrong because open design holds that security should not rely on secrecy of the mechanism. It does not describe layered defenses. Defense in depth is the security strategy of layering multiple independent controls so that defeating one layer only brings an attacker face to face with the next. It borrows its name from military fortification, where successive walls, moats, and keep slow an invading force and create time for defenders to respond. Each layer addresses a different attack vector and has a different failure mode. A perimeter firewall blocks unsolicited connections. Network segmentation contains lateral movement. Endpoint protection catches malware on devices. Multi-factor authentication slows credential abuse. And encryption protects data even if an attacker reaches it. The critical distinction is between defense in depth and redundancy. Redundancy means two of the same control. Two firewalls with the same rules will miss the same attack. Defense in depth means different kinds of controls that compensate for each other's blind spots, valuing diversity of mechanism, not just multiplicity of devices. On an exam, watch for signal words like layered controls, no single point of failure, complementary protections, and overlapping defenses. When a scenario describes several different controls, each covering a different angle of attack, defense in depth is the strategy being applied. Defense in depth accepts that any single control will eventually fail, and designs the environment so that no single failure produces a complete compromise. Diversity of mechanism is what makes it work. Question 19. A development team is evaluating two authentication libraries. One is small, well audited, and contains a few hundred lines of code. The other is feature-rich with tens of thousands of lines and many optional plugins. Which design principle most strongly favors the smaller library? Your options are A. Complete mediation. B. Psychological acceptability. C. Separation of privilege. D. Economy of mechanism. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is D. Economy of mechanism. D is correct because economy of mechanism favors small, simple security designs because they are easier to verify, audit, and reason about. The smaller library presents less code that could contain undiscovered flaws. A is wrong because complete mediation requires checking every access. It does not address library size. B is wrong because psychological acceptability addresses whether users will accept and use a control. Library size is not the issue. C is wrong because separation of privilege requires multiple conditions for access. It does not relate to the simplicity of a chosen mechanism. Economy of mechanism is the principle that security design should be as small, simple, and easy to verify as possible. The core insight is that complexity is the enemy of security. The more intricate a system, the more places a flaw can hide. Think about it at 3 levels. Every line of code is a hiding spot for bugs. Every configuration option risks an unsafe combination, and every interaction between components is a potential attack surface. Simpler designs have fewer of all 3. A real example: a team choosing between a large identity framework with every protocol imaginable and a minimal library supporting only the 2 flows they actually need. The minimal library fits in a few hundred lines, can be reviewed thoroughly, and a year later shows 0 audit findings, while the large framework required multiple security patches. Economy of mechanism is often confused with 2 neighbors. Least common mechanism minimizes shared resources between users to limit side channel risk. A different concern entirely. Complete mediation requires checking every access against current policy. That's about frequency of checks, not system size. Economy of mechanism uniquely targets the complexity of the design itself. On the exam, when a scenario asks you to choose between a feature-rich complex design and a simpler limited one, economy of mechanism favors the simpler option. Signal words include minimal, small surface, easy to verify, and reduce complexity. Boring, predictable designs are a security virtue. Question 20. A bank requires 2 officers to approve any wire transfer over $50,000, with each officer using a separate authentication token and entering an independent confirmation code. Which design principle does this implement? Your options are A. Least common mechanism, B. Separation of privilege, C. Open design, D. Trust. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is B. Separation of privilege. B is correct because separation of privilege requires that a critical action depend on more than one condition or party. Requiring 2 officers with separate credentials enforces that no single person can complete the transfer. A is wrong because least common mechanism limits shared resources between users to reduce side channel risk. It does not address multi-party authorization. C is wrong because open design refers to publishing the design openly rather than relying on secrecy. It does not specify how many parties must approve an action. D is wrong because trust is a broad principle about choosing what to rely on. It does not specifically require multiple authorizers. Separation of privilege is the security design principle that critical actions must require more than one independent condition, credential, or authorized party before they can complete. No single key, person, or check should be sufficient on its own. The classic illustration is the dual key nuclear launch system, where both keys must turn at the same time. The modern equivalent is the dual approval workflow for high-value wire transfers, production deployments, or security policy changes. Mechanically, Separation of privilege takes several forms: two-factor cryptographic keys, two-party approval workflows, split knowledge schemes where no individual holds the full secret, and compartmentalized access. Each form ensures no single person, key, or system can act alone. Separation of privilege is often confused with two related concepts. Separation of duty splits a workflow across roles to prevent any one role from completing it, start to finish. Multi-factor authentication satisfies separation of privilege for the act of logging in, but is narrower than the general principle. The underlying logic is probabilistic. Multiple independent safeguards all failing simultaneously is far less likely than any single safeguard failing. Whenever exam scenarios mention two keys required, dual control, or split authority, separation of privilege is the principle at work. Question 21. A small business installs a device between its internal network and the internet that blocks incoming connections except for those needed for its public web server. What is the primary function of this device? Your options are: A. Routing traffic between subnets based on shortest path. B. Translating internal addresses for external connections. C. Filtering network traffic based on a defined security policy. D. Encrypting all traffic between the internal network and remote sites. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is C. Filtering network traffic based on a defined security policy. C is correct because a firewall enforces a security policy by permitting or blocking traffic based on configured rules. Blocking inbound connections except for the web server is the textbook firewall function. A is wrong because routing forwards packets toward destinations using paths in a routing table. It does not by itself enforce security policy. B is wrong because network address translation maps internal addresses to external ones. Some firewalls perform that function, but it is not the primary security role described. D is wrong because encrypting traffic is the role of virtual private networks or transport layer security, not the access control role described in the scenario. A firewall's defining job is simple but critical. For every packet that arrives at a network boundary, it decides yes or no based on a configured policy. That single responsibility, policy enforcement, is what separates a firewall from every other network device. The firewall sits between zones of different trust levels, most commonly an internal network and the public internet. Every packet crossing that boundary is evaluated against the rule set before it is allowed through or dropped. Mechanically, every firewall has three primitives: a rule set defining what to allow or deny, a decision engine that evaluates each packet against the rules in order, and an enforcement layer that actually drops, allows, or modifies traffic based on that decision. The key exam distinction is that only a firewall enforces policy-based access control at the boundary. An IDS observes and alerts but never blocks. A router forwards based on routing tables without security decisions. An IPS specializes in deep payload inspection for specific attack pattern, a different job entirely. Whenever an exam scenario describes a device whose job is to apply a configured policy to traffic at a network boundary, that device is a firewall. No other device owns that role. Question 22. A network engineer compares two firewall types. The first inspects each packet against rules independently. The second tracks the state of each connection, so it can recognize whether a packet belongs to a previously established session. Which firewall types are being compared? Your options are A. Packet filtering firewall and stateful firewall. B. Stateful firewall and proxy firewall. C. Application layer firewall and packet filtering firewall. D. Proxy firewall and next generation firewall. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is A. packet filtering firewall and stateful firewall. A is correct because a packet filtering firewall examines headers per packet without tracking state. A stateful firewall maintains a table of active connections and decides based on session context. The scenario contrasts those two precisely. B is wrong because proxy firewalls operate at the application layer and broker connections rather than just track them. The scenario describes connection state tracking, not application proxying. C is wrong because an application layer firewall inspects protocol content like web requests, which is not described in the scenario. D is wrong because next-generation firewalls add features like intrusion prevention and deep packet inspection beyond stateful tracking, which goes beyond what the comparison describes. Firewalls have evolved significantly from their earliest form. Understanding the difference between packet filtering and stateful inspection reveals why modern firewalls are so much more effective at enforcing network security policy. A packet filtering firewall treats every packet in isolation, matching it against a rule list with no memory of prior packets. A stateful firewall maintains a connection table so it knows which packets belong to which ongoing session, allowing it to permit return traffic automatically without a separate inbound rule. Mechanically, the stateful firewall indexes its table by source address, destination address, source and destination port, and protocol. Every new packet is checked against the table first. If it matches an existing session, it is permitted under session-level rules. If it does not match, the firewall consults the rule set to decide whether to open a new session entry. The key trade-off is resource cost. Packet filtering scales easily because each decision is independent and requires almost no memory. Stateful inspection consumes memory proportional to active connections and can be overwhelmed by connection floods. Mature deployments layer both. Cheap packet filtering drops obviously bad traffic before it consumes state resources. When an exam stem mentions connection tracking, session state, or return traffic being allowed automatically, stateful inspection is being tested. If the scenario describes per packet rules with no memory of prior traffic, that is packet filtering. The split is specifically about whether session context informs the filtering decision. Question 23. An organization wants a single perimeter device that can perform stateful filtering, deep packet inspection, intrusion prevention, and identification of specific applications regardless of port. What category of device best matches these requirements? Your options are A. Stateless packet filtering firewall, B. Next generation firewall, C. Network intrusion detection sensor, D. Host-based firewall. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is B. Next generation firewall. B is correct because a next generation firewall combines traditional stateful inspection with application awareness, intrusion prevention, and deep packet inspection in one device. The features listed map directly to its capabilities. A is wrong because a stateless packet filter only examines headers and cannot perform deep inspection or application identification. C is wrong because a network intrusion detection sensor monitors traffic for malicious patterns but does not by itself filter packets or perform firewall functions. D is wrong because a host-based firewall protects an individual endpoint, not a perimeter, and typically lacks the application-aware features listed. A next-generation firewall is more than a traditional firewall with extras bolted on. It's a single integrated platform that combines multiple security functions into one unified decision engine, letting teams write policies based on business intent rather than raw network configurations. The defining capabilities are application identification, user identity awareness, deep packet inspection, and integrated intrusion prevention. Unlike older firewalls that only examined ports and IPs, an NGFW reads the actual payload to determine what application is running and who is using it. Mechanically, traffic flows through a pipeline. Stateful inspection handles connection state first. Then application identification reads the payload. User identification maps the source to a directory account. And intrusion prevention scans for attack signatures. The entire pipeline produces a single allow or deny decision per session. The critical distinction is integration. A true NGFW correlates session state, application identity, user identity, and threat signatures in one engine. A bundle of separate products inspecting the same traffic in series lacks cross-function awareness, unified login, and simplified policy authoring. When an exam scenario describes a single device performing application awareness, user-based policy, and intrusion prevention on the same traffic, that's the next generation firewall category. The integration is what defines it, not just the feature list. Question 24. A company hosts a public-facing web server that must be reachable from the internet, while its internal employee records database must never be exposed externally. To isolate the web server, the network team places it in a separate network zone protected by firewall rules on both sides. What is this zone commonly called? Your options are A. Virtual private network tunnel, B. Hot site for disaster recovery, C. Honeynet trap zone, D. Demilitarized zone. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is D. Demilitarized zone. D is correct because a demilitarized zone is a network segment that hosts public-facing services and sits between the external network and the trusted internal network, protected by firewalls on both sides. The scenario matches this design exactly. A is wrong because a virtual private network tunnel provides encrypted remote access, not a zone for public-facing services. B is wrong because a hot site is a fully equipped backup facility for business continuity. It does not describe a network segment for public services. C is wrong because a honeynet is a deliberate trap to attract attackers for study. It is not where production public services are hosted. A demilitarized zone, or DMZ, is a network segment that hosts public-facing services while keeping them isolated from your most sensitive internal systems. The concept borrows from the political idea of a buffer zone separating opposing forces. The classic implementation uses two firewalls. The outer firewall sits between the internet and the DMZ, allowing limited inbound traffic to expose services. The inner firewall sits between the DMZ and the internal network, permitting only specific approved traffic, like a web server querying a back-end database, and blocking everything else. The design creates a deliberate trust gradient across three zones. The internet is fully untrusted. The DMZ is partially trusted, exposed to attack and assumed potentially compromised. The internal network is the most trusted, protected by the inner firewall even if the DMZ is breached. The DMZ is often confused with related concepts. An extranet shares access with business partners. A VPN provides encrypted tunnels for remote users. Cloud trust boundaries use virtual networks and security groups. Only the DMZ is specifically the on-premises design for isolating public-facing services from internal systems. The DMZ doesn't assume exposed servers will never be compromised. It assumes they will be, and contains the damage. A captured web server still cannot reach your internal database because the inner firewall enforces that boundary regardless. Question 25. A new firewall rule set is being tested. The team notices that traffic intended to be blocked is reaching the internal network when the rules are evaluated. The same rules in a different order produce the expected result. What is the most likely root cause? Your options are A broad permit rule precedes the narrow deny rule and the first matching rule wins. B, the firewall is stateless and cannot enforce ordered rules. C, firewalls cannot block traffic that has already entered the network. D. The firewall is silently dropping logs only. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is A. A broad permit rule precedes the narrow deny rule, and the first matching rule wins. A is correct because most firewalls evaluate rules from top to bottom and apply the first matching rule. If a broad permit rule appears before a narrow deny, the permit wins and the deny never fires, allowing unwanted traffic through. B is wrong because stateful behavior is unrelated to rule ordering. Both stateful and stateless firewalls process rules in defined order. C is wrong because firewalls placed at network boundaries can absolutely block traffic crossing them. Placement is unrelated to the ordering problem described. D is wrong because dropping logs would not change which traffic the firewall passes or blocks. The fix requires changing the rule set, not the log behavior. Firewalls evaluate rules in a strict top-down sequence, applying the very first rule that matches a packet and ignoring everything below it. This first match behavior is the engine behind every firewall policy decision. For every packet, the firewall walks the rule list from top to bottom. The moment a rule matches, the configured action, allow or deny, is applied and evaluation stops. Rules below that match point are never reached. The critical danger is placing a specific deny rule below a broader permit rule. The permit matches first, the deny never fires, and traffic that should be blocked silently passes through, often for weeks or months before anyone notices. The fix is always to place more specific rules above broader ones. A deny targeting flag destinations must sit above a general permit web traffic rule, or it will never have a chance to act. Rule ordering errors are asymmetric in their danger. An accidental deny is obvious. Traffic fails and users complain. An accidental allow is silent. The unwanted access continues undetected until an audit or breach reveals it, making it far more hazardous. Question 26. A security team installs a device that watches network traffic, recognizes attack patterns, generates alerts, and writes to a log, but does not block or modify any traffic on its own. Which device is this? Your options are A. Intrusion prevention system, B. Stateful firewall, C. Intrusion detection system, D. Web application firewall. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. Intrusion detection system. C is correct because an intrusion detection system passively monitors traffic, identifies suspicious patterns, and alerts operators without blocking traffic. The described behavior matches an intrusion detection system exactly. A is wrong because an intrusion prevention system actively blocks or modifies malicious traffic in addition to detecting it. The scenario explicitly says traffic is not blocked. B is wrong because a stateful firewall makes allow or deny decisions per packet or session. It does not specialize in pattern-based attack recognition. D is wrong because a web application firewall focuses on application layer attacks on web traffic. The scenario describes general network monitoring, not a web application focus. An intrusion detection system, or IDS, is a passive monitoring tool that watches network traffic and host activity for signs of malicious behavior. Its defining trait is observation without intervention. It sees, logs, and alerts, but it never blocks or modifies traffic. Mechanically, every IDS has 3 layers. A data collection layer captures packets from a network tap or host agent. A detection engine evaluates that data against rules, signatures, and baselines. An alerting and logging layer then produces structured records and sends notifications when a match occurs. In a typical deployment, the IDS sits out of band, receiving a mirrored copy of traffic rather than sitting in the direct path. This means a false positive never disrupts legitimate traffic, a key operational advantage over inline systems. Exam writers frequently test the contrast between these four categories. An IDS observes and alerts but never blocks. An IPS shares detection logic but adds active blocking inline. A CM collects and correlates logs from many sources, including IDS feeds. Antivirus inspects files on endpoints at a completely different layer. When an exam scenario describes a device that monitors, generates alerts, and logs suspicious activity without taking any blocking action, that is the intrusion detection system category. Passive observation is the defining characteristic that sets it apart from every related tool. Question 27. An intrusion detection administrator updates its rule set every week with new patterns released by a threat intelligence feed. The system then matches incoming traffic against these patterns to flag known attacks. Which detection method is being used? Your options are A. Behavior-based detection, B. Heuristic detection, C. Anomaly-based detection, D. Signature-based detection. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is D. Signature-based detection. D is correct because signature-based detection compares traffic against a database of known attack patterns. Updating rule sets with new attack signatures from threat intelligence feeds is the defining workflow of this method. A is wrong because behavior-based detection builds a profile of normal behavior and flags deviations without relying on predefined signatures. B is wrong because heuristic detection uses general rules of thumb to spot potentially malicious behavior. It is broader and less precise than direct signature matching. C is wrong because anomaly-based detection uses statistical baselines of normal activity. It does not rely on a signature feed. Signature-based detection is one of the oldest and most widely deployed intrusion detection methods. It works by comparing observed activity against a curated database of known attack patterns and firing an alert whenever a match is found. A signature can take many forms. It might be an exact byte sequence inside a packet, a specific command line string, a file hash tied to known malware, or a value in a particular protocol field. Because each signature is tightly specified, the approach produces very few false positives. Mechanically, the detection engine evaluates every incoming observation against the current signature database. Simple signatures check for exact matches, while more advanced ones use regular expressions or understand protocol structure to inspect specific fields. An alert fires when a match reaches the configured confidence threshold. Signature detection excels in three areas. It generates few false positives because patterns are precise. It is fast because matching a finite list scales linearly and parallelizes well. And it is operationally proven. Antivirus products have used the same logic since the late 1980s. The fundamental weakness is that signature-based detection is blind to anything without an existing signature. A novel attack or a known attack slightly modified to evade detection passes through unnoticed. Serious attackers deliberately exploit the window between first use in the wild and signature deployment, which is the period of greatest exposure. Question 28. A new intrusion detection sensor learns traffic patterns over 2 weeks of normal operations. After deployment, it flags an unusual surge of outbound database queries at 3 in the morning, even though no signature matches that behavior. Which detection method is in use? Your options are A. Signature-based detection, B. Anomaly-based detection, C. Stateful inspection, D. Deep packet inspection. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is B. Anomaly-based detection. B is correct because anomaly-based detection builds a statistical model of normal activity and flags deviations from that baseline. The 2-week training period and detection of unusual behavior without a signature match describe this method precisely. A is wrong because signature-based detection requires a predefined pattern to match. The scenario explicitly states no signature was matched. C is wrong because stateful inspection tracks session state for firewall decisions and does not by itself flag unusual behavioral patterns. D is wrong because deep packet inspection examines packet payloads against rules. It does not by itself learn baseline traffic patterns. Anomaly-based detection works by learning what normal looks like, then flagging anything that deviates from that baseline. Unlike signature-based detection, it doesn't need a known attack pattern, just a clear definition of normal. Mechanically, the process has 3 phases. Training observes activity long enough to build a reliable baseline. Detection scores incoming activity against that baseline. Alerting fires when the deviation score crosses a configured threshold. The baseline itself can be statistical, tracking typical login times and frequencies, or model-based, using machine learning to distinguish normal from suspicious patterns. The challenge is keeping the baseline adaptive as the environment evolves over time. The key nuance is that anomalous is not the same as malicious. Legitimate business changes can look just as suspicious as an attack. When false alert volume gets too high, operators begin ignoring them, defeating the entire purpose of the system. Anomaly detection catches novel attacks and insider abuse that no signature could find, but it demands careful tuning. Mature programs combine anomaly and signature methods rather than relying on either alone. Question 29. An organization deploys sensors at strategic points on the network backbone to monitor traffic flowing between subnets, and it also installs detection agents on each laptop to watch local processes and files. Which 2 intrusion detection deployment types are in use? Your options are A. Network-based detection and host-based detection. B. Signature-based detection and behavior-based detection. C. Inline detection and out-of-band detection. D. Active detection and passive detection. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. Network-based detection and host-based detection. A is correct because a network-based intrusion detection system monitors traffic between systems, typically at network choke points. A host-based intrusion detection system runs on individual endpoints and watches local activity. The scenario describes one of each. B is wrong because signature-based and behavior-based refer to detection methods rather than where the sensor sits in the architecture. C is wrong because inline and out-of-band describe traffic flow position rather than network versus host placement. D is wrong because active and passive describe whether the system can respond to threats, not its placement. Intrusion detection systems come in 2 fundamental deployment models, network-based and host-based. Each observes a different slice of the security landscape, and understanding where each sensor sits is the core idea tested on exams. A network-based sensor watches packets and sessions flowing across the wire at choke points like perimeter boundaries or segment switches. A host-based agent sits inside an individual machine, watching processes, file changes, and operating system events. Neither alone sees everything. Deployed together, they fill each other's blind spots. Network sensors are deployed at choke points using traffic taps or switch mirror ports, capturing what moves between systems. Host agents are installed directly on each protected endpoint and hook into the operating system. Both feed their alerts into a centralized analysis platform where they can be correlated. Each model has known blind spots. Network sensors cannot see traffic that bypasses their monitoring point, and encrypted traffic is opaque without decryption keys. Host agents can only protect systems where they are installed. Unmanaged devices are invisible to them. A privilege escalation or local persistence change leaves no distinctive network traffic. making it invisible to NIDs but clearly visible to HIDs. When an exam scenario mentions network traffic, choke points, or sensors on the wire, think NEDs. When it mentions process activity, file integrity, or operating system events, think HIDs. Signature versus anomaly, inline versus out of band, and active versus passive are separate dimensions. The network versus host distinction is purely about where observation happens. Question 30. When an intrusion prevention system detects a known exploit attempt against a web server, it immediately drops the offending packets, resets the suspicious connection, and updates its block list to prevent further traffic from that source. What core capability distinguishes an intrusion prevention system from an intrusion detection system in this scenario? Your options are: A. Intrusion prevention uses signature-based detection while intrusion detection does not. B. Intrusion prevention encrypts traffic between sensors. C. Intrusion prevention actively blocks malicious traffic rather than only alerting. D. Intrusion prevention only operates on host endpoints. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. Intrusion prevention actively blocks malicious traffic rather than only alerting. C is correct because the distinguishing feature of an intrusion prevention system is its ability to take action against malicious traffic, such as dropping packets, resetting sessions, or updating block lists. An intrusion detection system observes and alerts but does not block. A is wrong because both intrusion detection and intrusion prevention can use signature-based detection. The difference is response, not detection method. B is wrong because neither intrusion detection nor intrusion prevention is defined by traffic encryption between sensors. D is wrong because both intrusion detection and intrusion prevention can operate on networks or hosts. Deployment location does not distinguish them. An intrusion prevention system takes everything an intrusion detection system does and adds one critical capability. It can actually stop malicious traffic, not just report it. The defining feature is inline placement. Traffic must physically pass through the device, and for every packet or session the RPS makes a real-time decision. Allow it, drop it silently, or reset the connection entirely. Those three actions, allow, drop, and reset or quarantine, close the response gap that detection-only systems leave open, where an attack can succeed before a human analyst ever intervenes. Because the RPS sits directly in the traffic path, the operational stakes are higher than for detection alone. A failure or an aggressive false positive doesn't just generate an alert. It can drop legitimate traffic or take the network offline, which is why tuning, high availability design, and bypass switches are essential. It helps to know where RPS fits among similar products. An IDS shares the detection logic but cannot block. A WAF targets web application attacks specifically. A next-generation firewall bundles RPS capability alongside broader firewall functions. RPS alone is the pure inline detection plus blocking pattern. Questioner 31. Two business partners want to exchange large encrypted reports daily. They agree on a single shared key that both will use to encrypt and decrypt the files. What encryption type are they using, and what is its main practical drawback in larger deployments? Your options are A. Asymmetric encryption, whose drawback is high computational cost. B. Hashing, whose drawback is that data cannot be recovered. C. Steganography, whose drawback is hidden payload size. D. Symmetric encryption, whose drawback is secure key distribution. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is D. Symmetric encryption, whose drawback is secure key distribution. D is correct because symmetric encryption uses one shared key for both encryption and decryption. It is fast and well suited to bulk data, but distributing that key securely to many parties becomes the main practical challenge as the number of participants grows. A is wrong because asymmetric encryption uses different keys for encryption and decryption, not a single shared key. Its drawback is speed, not key distribution. B is wrong because hashing produces a fixed output and cannot be reversed, so it is not used for confidential data exchange. C is wrong because steganography hides data inside other media. It is not what the scenario describes. Symmetric encryption is the oldest and fastest form of cryptography. A single shared key both locks and unlocks the data, meaning every authorized party must possess that same secret key. Mechanically, the cipher applies mathematical transformations to plain text using the key to produce ciphertext. Applying the same key in reverse recovers the original plain text exactly. No separate key exists. Because symmetric algorithms are fast and mathematically efficient, they excel at bulk data protection, full disk encryption, VPN tunnels, database encryption at rest, and high-speed bulk data transfer are all common deployments. The central weakness is key distribution. Both parties need the key before they can communicate securely, but they have no safe channel to share it in the first place. Modern protocols resolve this by using asymmetric cryptography to negotiate a fresh symmetric key at the start of each session, combining the speed of symmetric encryption with the safe key exchange of asymmetric cryptography. When an exam scenario describes a single key used for both encryption and decryption with no separate public component, that is symmetric encryption, fast, reversible, and dependent on keeping that one key secret. Question 32. A web application stores user passwords by running each one through a one-way mathematical function that produces a fixed-length output. The application never stores the original password. Which technique is in use? Your options are hashing, B. Symmetric encryption, C. Public key encryption, D. Tokenization. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is A. Hashing. A is correct because hashing applies a one-way function to produce a fixed-length output, allowing comparison without storing the original value. This is the standard pattern for password storage. B is wrong because symmetric encryption is reversible with the right key, which is not appropriate for password storage where recovery should not be possible. C is wrong because public key encryption is asymmetric and reversible with the private key. It is also not designed for fixed-length output. D is wrong because tokenization replaces sensitive data with a non-sensitive substitute backed by a lookup table. It is not a one-way mathematical function. Hashing is a one-way mathematical function that takes any input and produces a fixed-length output called a digest or hash value. The output looks completely random and reveals nothing about the original input. Every hash function shares 4 defining properties. The output length is always fixed regardless of input size. Even a single bit change completely alters the digest. The process is irreversible, and finding 2 different inputs that produce the same hash is computationally infeasible. In practice, a retailer never stores your actual password. It combines your password with a random per-user sort, runs it through the hash function, and stores only the resulting digest. At login, the same process is repeated and the digests are compared. No plain text password is ever retained. Hashing is often confused with 3 other techniques. Symmetric encryption is reversible with the correct key. Asymmetric encryption is reversible with the matching private key. Tokenization maps back through a database lookup. Only hashing is a truly irreversible mathematical reduction. That distinction is exactly what exams test. Whenever an exam scenario describes a transformation that produces a fixed-length value from any input and cannot be undone, the answer is hashing. One way, fixed length, and irreversible are the signal words to recognize. Question 33. A laptop is stolen from an employee's car. Although the thief can physically access the drive, the data is unreadable because the operating system encrypts the entire disk, and the decryption key is unlocked only by the owner's password and a trusted hardware module on the laptop. Which protection is described? Your options are A. Encryption of data in transit, B. Encryption of data at rest, C. Hashing of file contents, D. Network segmentation. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is B. Encryption of data at rest. B is correct because encryption of data at rest protects information stored on disks, drives, or other persistent media. Full disk encryption tied to a hardware module is a primary example of this control. A is wrong because data in transit refers to information moving across a network, such as a secure web session. A stolen offline laptop is not in transit. C is wrong because hashing is one way and cannot be reversed by the legitimate user, so it is not used for general file storage. D is wrong because network segmentation isolates network zones and does not protect a stolen disk. Encryption at rest protects data stored on physical media, disks, drives, backups, and mobile devices. It exists because physical security around storage can never be fully guaranteed. Any persistent storage medium is a target. Devices get lost, stolen, sold, or improperly decommissioned, and without encryption, whoever holds the hardware holds the data. Encryption at rest can be applied at multiple layers. Full disk encryption secures every block on the drive. File-level encryption protects individual files. Database encryption targets specific columns. And cloud object encryption secures data blobs before they are written. The real challenge is key management. A drive encrypted with a key stored right alongside it provides almost no real protection. Meaningful security comes from keys held in a hardware security module, unlocked only through authentication and completely separate from the storage medium itself. Remember that encryption at rest is distinct from encryption in transit, which protects data moving across a network, and end-to-end encryption, which combines both. Encryption at rest is one essential layer in a defense in-depth strategy, not a complete solution on its own. Question 34. A user logs into an online banking site. The browser address bar shows a padlock and indicates that the connection is using transport layer security. Which two CIA properties does this connection most directly protect for the data while it travels between browser and server? Your options are A. Availability and accountability, B. Authentication and non-repudiation, C. Confidentiality and integrity, D. Authorization and auditing. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. Confidentiality and integrity. C is correct because transport layer security encrypts the data traveling between client and server, providing confidentiality, and it includes message authentication that ensures the data has not been altered in transit, providing integrity. A is wrong because transport layer security does not directly ensure availability of the service or accountability of user actions. B is wrong because transport layer security does provide server authentication, but the question asks about properties protecting the data itself in transit, where confidentiality and integrity are the core pair. D is wrong because authorization and auditing are handled by the application after a session is established, not by the transport layer itself. Transport layer security, or TLS, is the dominant protocol for protecting data as it travels across networks. It underpins nearly every secure connection on the modern internet, from web browsing to email to application APIs. TLS provides 3 core guarantees. Confidentiality uses symmetric encryption, so only the 2 endpoints can read the data. Integrity uses message authentication codes, so any modification in transit is detected and the connection torn down. Authentication uses digital certificates issued by trusted certificate authorities to prove the server is legitimate. TLS operates in 2 phases. The handshake negotiates a cipher suite, verifies the server's certificate, and derives a fresh session key using asymmetric cryptography. This happens once and is computationally expensive. The data phase then uses that symmetric session key to encrypt and integrity protect every message, fast enough for high-speed traffic. It is equally important to know TLS's limits. It does not protect data at rest after delivery, does not authenticate the user to the application, does not guarantee service availability, and does not tunnel network layer traffic the way a VPN does. When an exam scenario mentions encrypted in transit, server certificates, cipher suite negotiation, or protection against eavesdropping, TLS is the answer. Remember, TLS secures the connection itself, not what happens to the data before or after. Question 35. A company sets up a system in which a trusted authority issues digital certificates that bind public keys to identities, and users rely on those certificates to verify each other before exchanging encrypted messages. What framework is being described? Your options are A. Public key infrastructure, B. Pre-shared key exchange, C. Symmetric session keying, D. Kerberos ticket exchange. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is A. Public key infrastructure. A is correct because public key infrastructure uses a certificate authority to issue digital certificates that bind public keys to identities, enabling trust between parties who have never met. The scenario maps directly to this framework. B is wrong because pre-shared key exchange relies on a secret known in advance between parties. It does not involve a trusted authority or digital certificates. C is wrong because symmetric session keying produces temporary symmetric keys for a session, often using prior authentication. It is not the trust distribution framework described. D is wrong because Kerberos uses a key distribution center and tickets for authentication on internal networks. It is distinct from public key infrastructure, which uses certificates. Public key infrastructure, or PKI, solves one of the hardest problems in cryptography. How do 2 strangers reliably learn each other's public keys? The answer is a system of trusted authorities that issue signed certificates binding a public key to a real-world identity. Mechanically, a subscriber generates a key pair and submits a sign-in request. The certificate's authority verifies their identity and issues a certificate signed with the authority's own private key. A relying party then validates that signature, checks the expiration date, and confirms the certificate has not been revoked. Trust flows down a chain. A root CA signs an intermediate CA certificate, and the intermediate CA signs the subscriber's certificate. Browsers ship with a built-in list of trusted root authorities, so any certificate that chains up to one of those roots is automatically trusted. The critical nuance is the trust assumption. If a root authority is compromised, every certificate it ever issued must be treated as suspect. If an intermediate authority is compromised, all certificates derived from it are tainted. The entire system is therefore only as strong as the operational security of the authorities themselves. PKI is often confused with related systems. The web of trust lets users sign each other's keys directly with no central authority. Kerberos uses a key distribution center and tickets. Pre-shared keys require a secret agreed on in advance. Only PKI uses the hierarchical, certificate-based model that scales to global communication between strangers. Question 36. A coffee shop is upgrading its Wi-Fi from an older protocol to a newer one that adds protection against offline password guessing and provides individualized data encryption even on a shared password network. Which protocol is being adopted? Your options are Alt Web, B. OpenSSite, C. WPA Enterprise, D. WPA3. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. WPA3. D is correct because WPA3 introduces a stronger handshake that resists offline dictionary attacks and provides individualized data encryption between each client and the access point. The improvements listed are its defining features. A is wrong because WEP is the oldest and weakest Wi-Fi protocol, deprecated for years. It is the opposite of an upgrade. B is wrong because an open SSID has no encryption or authentication. It would represent a downgrade. C is wrong because WPA Enterprise uses external authentication against a backend server, but it does not introduce the specific anti-dictionary handshake or individualized encryption on a shared password network. WPA3 is the current standard for securing wireless networks, replacing WPA2, which had grown vulnerable to practical attacks. Understanding why it was needed and how it works mechanically is what separates it from every other wireless security standard. WPA2 fell to two concrete attacks. The crack attack manipulated the four-way handshake to force key reuse, enabling decryption. Separately, offline dictionary attacks let adversaries crack captured handshakes on powerful hardware. Neither weakness could be patched incrementally. The handshake itself had to be redesigned. WPA3's core change is the simultaneous authentication of equals handshake. Unlike the old pre-shared key exchange, SAE produces no material that can be taken offline and guessed against. Every password attempt requires live interaction with the access point, making offline dictionary attacks infeasible by design. WPA3 delivers three defining properties: the SAE handshake that replaces the old PSK exchange, per client individualized encryption, so users on the same shared password network cannot read each other's traffic, and built-in offline attack resistance at the protocol level, not dependent on password strength. WPA3 comes in two modes. Personal mode uses the SAE handshake with a shared password designed for homes and small businesses. Enterprise mode authenticates each user individually against a backend server using the 802.wax framework, giving large organizations per user access control. Both share the same underlying cryptographic improvements. Question 37. An attacker sets up a wireless access point with the same network name as a corporate Wi-Fi network in the hope that employees' devices will connect to it automatically. Which wireless attack is being launched? Your options are A. Bluejacking, B. Evil twin attack, C. War driving, D. Replay attack. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is B. Evil twin attack. B is correct because an evil twin attack uses a malicious access point that impersonates a legitimate one to lure devices into connecting. The setup of a duplicate network name is the defining feature. A is wrong because bluejacking sends unsolicited messages over Bluetooth and is unrelated to Wi-Fi network name impersonation. C is wrong because war driving is the act of searching for accessible Wi-Fi networks while moving through an area. It does not involve impersonation. D is wrong because a replay attack captures and resends valid network traffic. It does not involve broadcasting a duplicate network name. The evil twin attack is one of the most deceptive wireless threats you'll encounter. Understanding why it works requires looking at how Wi-Fi clients decide which networks to trust. The attacker sets up a rogue access point broadcasting the exact same network name as a legitimate one. often with a stronger signal. The victim device connects automatically, routing all traffic through the attacker's machine, where it can be observed or modified. Once the victim is connected, the attacker acts as the network router. They can intercept traffic, serve fake login pages, strip TLS encryption, and push malicious updates, all invisibly to the user. The attack exploits three weaknesses. Wi-Fi clients trust networks based on name alone. Devices auto-reconnect to remembered network names without verification. And most public networks have no cryptographic identity that clients can validate. The evil twin is specifically a wireless impersonation attack, distinct from a generic rogue access point, which may not impersonate anything. It is a wireless implementation of the man-in-the-middle pattern, and it is not war driving, which is passive reconnaissance with no active attack. Question 38. A startup moves its email and productivity software to a major cloud provider. The provider manages the underlying servers, operating systems, and applications, while the startup configures user accounts and data policies. Under the shared responsibility model, who is responsible for patching the underlying operating system? Your options are A, the startup because it owns the data, B, both parties equally, C, the cloud provider because it operates the platform, D, the internet service provider that connects the startup. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C, the cloud provider because it operates the platform. C is correct because in a software as a service arrangement like cloud-hosted email and productivity software, the cloud provider is responsible for the underlying infrastructure, including the operating system. The customer handles its data and user-level configuration. A is wrong because the startup is responsible for its data and user accounts, not for patching servers the provider owns and operates. B is wrong because responsibility under the shared model is split, not equal. Software as a service shifts most infrastructure responsibility to the provider. D is wrong because the internet service provider supplies connectivity. It has no role in operating system patching of the cloud platform. The shared responsibility model defines how security duties are split between a cloud provider and the customer. The exact division shifts depending on which service model is in use. In IaaS, the customer manages the operating system and everything above the VM. In PaaS, the provider takes over the OS. In SaaS, the provider runs the full stack. Regardless of model, the customer always owns their data, identities, and configured policies. Think of the stack as layers. The provider always owns the physical data center, hypervisor, and network. The customer always owns data and identities. The operating system is the critical middle layer. Who patches it depends entirely on which service model the workload runs under. Operating system patching is the detail exam writers test most often. In IaaS, the customer chose and installed the OS, so patching is the customer's job. In both PaaS and SaaS, the customer never directly accesses the OS, so the provider handles patching. Misunderstanding where the responsibility line falls remains one of the most common sources of cloud security failures. When a scenario asks who is responsible for a cloud security task, identify the service model first. That determines the boundary. Question 39. A development team rents virtual machines and storage from a cloud provider and installs their own operating systems, databases, and applications. Which cloud service model are they using? Your options are A. Infrastructure as a service, B. Platform as a service, C. Software as a service, D. Function as a service. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is A. Infrastructure as a service. A is correct because infrastructure as a service supplies virtualized compute, storage, and networking on which the customer installs everything above the hypervisor. Renting virtual machines and installing the operating system fits this model exactly. B is wrong because Platform as a Service provides a managed runtime and development tooling, hiding the operating system from the developer. C is wrong because Software as a Service delivers a complete application. The customer does not manage the operating system or runtime. D is wrong because Function as a Service runs short live code in response to events without exposing servers or operating systems. Infrastructure as a Service is the cloud model where the provider supplies virtualized compute, storage, and networking, and the customer controls everything above that foundation. Understanding where the provider's responsibility ends and the customer's begins is the core concept you need to master. The provider's responsibility ends at the hypervisor boundary. Everything inside the virtual machine, the operating system, runtime, middleware, and application, belongs entirely to the customer. This dividing line is what makes ECAS distinct from every other cloud model. Because the customer controls the virtual machine, 4 critical operational tasks fall squarely on their shoulders: patching the operating system, configuring the firewall, backing up data, and monitoring for security incidents. Exam questions often test whether students mistakenly assume the provider handles these. IaaS is often confused with Platform as a Service and Software as a Service. PaaS abstracts the operating system away, exposing only a managed runtime. SaaS delivers a complete application the customer simply configures. Only IaaS gives the customer raw virtual machines with full operating system control retained. Whenever an exam scenario describes a customer managing the operating system, installing software, or provisioning virtual machines with full administrative control, that arrangement is infrastructure as a service. That single signal, OS control retained by the customer, is your reliable indicator. Question 40. An organization stores sensitive customer records in cloud object storage. To ensure that even the cloud provider's staff cannot read the records, the organization encrypts files on its own servers before uploading them and retains exclusive control of the keys. Which protection model is being applied? Your options are: A. Provider managed encryption with provider held keys. B. Transport layer encryption only. C. Tokenization through the cloud provider. D. Client-side encryption with customer-held keys. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is D. Client-side encryption with customer-held keys. D is correct because client-side encryption performed before upload with keys retained by the customer prevents anyone at the cloud provider from reading the data even if they access the raw storage. This is the model described. A is wrong because provider managed keys would allow the provider's personnel to potentially decrypt the data, which is the exact scenario the organization wants to avoid. B is wrong because transport layer encryption protects data only while in motion, not while sitting in storage. C is wrong because tokenization through the provider relies on the provider's mapping, which gives the provider access. It does not match the requirement. Client-side encryption with customer-held keys is a cloud data protection pattern where the customer encrypts data before it ever reaches the cloud provider. The core guarantee is simple. The provider holds the data but can never read it. Even a trusted provider carries risks. Employees may inadvertently access data, authorities may compel disclosure, and providers themselves can be compromised. Keeping keys outside the provider's control ensures the stored data stays opaque, regardless of what happens on the provider's side. Mechanically, documents are encrypted at the workstation using keys stored in a customer-operated key management system or hardware security module. The ciphertext is uploaded to cloud storage where it remains unreadable. Decryption only happens back on the customer's systems, never inside the cloud. This pattern is commonly confused with three others. Provider-managed encryption gives the provider key access. TLS only protects data in transit but not at rest. Provider tokenization relies on the provider's own mapping table. Only client-side with customer-held keys ensures the storage and the keys are never together in the provider's hands. The key trade-off is confidentiality versus functionality. Client-side encryption delivers the strongest privacy guarantee against the provider, but features like server-side search, indexing, and analytics require readable data. Most architectures apply this pattern selectively to only the most sensitive data. Question 41. A bank requires customers to log in with a password, then enter a one-time code generated by an authenticator app on their phone. Which two authentication factor categories are being combined? Your options are A. Two knowledge factors, B. Something you know and something you have, C. Something you have and something you are, D. Two possession factors. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is B. Something you know and something you have. B is correct because a password is a knowledge factor that the user knows. An authenticator app generating a code is tied to a possessed device, which is something the user has. Combining the two satisfies multi-factor authentication. A is wrong because a password and a one-time code from a device are not both knowledge factors. The code is bound to a device, which is a possession factor. C is wrong because the password is not biometric. Biometrics like fingerprints would be required to qualify as something you are. D is wrong because a password is not a possession factor. It is a knowledge factor. Multi-factor authentication strengthens login security by requiring evidence from two or more different categories of authentication factor. Understanding those categories, CompTIA, and why they must be different is the core principle here. The three categories are something you know, like a password or PIN, something you have, like a phone or hardware token, and something you are, like a fingerprint or face scan. MFA requires evidence from at least two different categories, not just two pieces from the same one. The critical rule is that two factors must come from different categories. Two passwords provide no extra protection against credential theft, but a password combined with an authenticator code is genuine MFA, because even a stolen password is useless without the second factor from a separate source. The second factor is delivered through several channels. Authenticator apps generate time-based one-time codes every 30 seconds. Hardware tokens produce codes on a physical device. Push notifications ask you to approve the login. Hardware security keys use cryptographic challenges that resist phishing because they only sign requests from the legitimate domain. When you see a scenario on an exam describing authentication with more than one piece of evidence, check that the factors come from different categories. That distinction, different categories, not just different inputs, is what makes multi-factor authentication a meaningful security control. Question 42. A hospital assigns access to electronic health records based on job titles. Nurses receive one pre-configured set of permissions, physicians another, and billing clerks a third. Individual users inherit the permissions of whichever role they hold. Which access control model is in use? Your options are A. Discretionary access control, B. Mandatory access control, C. Role-based access control, D. Attribute-based access control. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. Role-based access control. C is correct because role-based access control groups permissions into roles aligned with job functions, and users inherit those permissions through role membership. Assigning permissions by job title is the defining feature. A is wrong because discretionary access control lets resource owners set permissions per user, which does not match a job title-based scheme. B is wrong because mandatory access control uses centrally enforced labels and clearances, typically in classified environments. The scenario does not mention clearances or labels. D is wrong because attribute-based access control evaluates many attributes per request, such as time, location, and resource type. The scenario only mentions roles. Role-based access control, or RBAC, is one of the most widely used access management models in enterprise systems. Instead of assigning permissions directly to individual users, RBAC introduces an important layer of indirection, the role. RBAC has 3 building blocks. Permissions are atomic capabilities, like reading a patient record or approving a purchase order. Roles are named bundles of those permissions tied to a job function. User assignments connect individual people to one or more roles, so they inherit exactly what those roles allow. In a hospital's electronic health record system, each job category maps to a role with tuned permissions. A nurse can read charts and add notes but cannot prescribe. A physician can do all of that plus place prescription orders. A billing clerk sees financial data but never clinical notes. When Jane is promoted, her access changes with a single role reassignment. The key exam distinction is knowing which model fits a scenario. Discretionary access control lets resource owners grant access individually. Mandatory access control enforces central security labels users cannot override. Attribute-based control evaluates context like time and location. RBAC uniquely uses named roles tied to job function as its organizing principle. When an exam scenario describes access granted through named roles tied to job categories, that is RBAC. The indirection from user to role to permission is what makes large-scale access management practical, and it is the concept exam writers are testing. Question 43. An organization adopts a security model in which no user, device, or system is trusted by default. Every access request is authenticated and authorized regardless of network location, and the principle of least privilege is enforced continuously. Which model is being adopted? Your options are A. Zero Trust Architecture, B. Perimeter-based security, C. Discretionary Trust Model, D. Honeynet Architecture. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is A. Zero Trust Architecture. A is correct because Zero Trust Architecture removes implicit trust based on network position and requires continuous verification of every access request, along with strict least privilege enforcement. The description maps directly to this model. B is wrong because perimeter-based security trusts users and systems once inside the network perimeter, which is the opposite of what the scenario describes. C is wrong because discretionary trust is not a standard recognized security architecture. D is wrong because a honeynet is a deception environment, not an overall trust model. Zero Trust is a security model built on a simple but radical idea. No user, device, or system should be trusted automatically based on where it sits on the network. Every access request must earn its way in. The traditional model drew a hard boundary around the corporate network and assumed anything inside was trustworthy. Cloud adoption and remote work eroded that boundary, and breach after breach showed attackers exploiting that implicit trust to move laterally for months undetected. Zero Trust depends on 4 core capabilities: strong identity verification for every request, context-aware policy that weighs user identity and device health, micro-segmentation to contain lateral movement, and continuous monitoring that revokes access when behavior turns suspicious. Mechanically, the shift means every connection, even between 2 servers in the same data center, must justify itself on the merits of who is connecting. From what device? For what purpose? Network location grants no trust whatsoever. When an exam scenario describes removing trust based on network location and verifying every request individually, zero trust is the model being applied. The phrase never trust, always verify is its defining commitment. Question 44. A user logs in with a valid username and password. The system then checks whether that user is permitted to open a particular financial report. Which two activities are being performed in order? Your options are A. Encryption and decryption, B. Hashing and salting, C. Auditing and accounting, D. Authentication and authorization. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. Authentication and authorization. D is correct because authentication verifies who the user is. Authorization determines what that authenticated user is allowed to do. The login followed by the permission check is the textbook ordering of authentication and authorization. A is wrong because encryption and decryption protect data confidentiality, not user identity and permission decisions. B is wrong because hashing and salting strengthen password storage. They are not the runtime sequence of identity and permission checks. C is wrong because auditing and accounting record what happened after the fact. They are not the prerequisite checks before granting access. Authentication and authorization are two distinct steps in access control. Authentication establishes who you are, while authorization determines what you're allowed to do. These steps must happen in sequence, and confusing them is one of the most common sources of security failures. The process always follows the same order. First, authentication answers who is making the request. Then, authorization consumes that verified identity to decide whether the specific action is permitted. Reversing or skipping either step breaks the entire model. Mechanically, authentication produces a trustworthy identity claim, often a session token. Authorization then consumes that claim and applies a policy to produce a permit or deny decision for the specific operation being attempted. The failure modes are predictable. Strong authentication with weak authorization lets any logged-in user perform restricted actions. Weak authentication with strong authorization lets attackers impersonate users and inherit their permissions. Each failure requires a different fix. They cannot substitute for each other. Whenever an exam scenario distinguishes between proving who a user is and deciding what that user can do, the authentication and authorization pair is being tested. They are always sequential, always separate, and each one can fail independently. Question 45. A government agency uses an access model in which every file carries a sensitivity label such as confidential or secret. Every user has a clearance level, and access decisions are made by central policy that users themselves cannot override. Which model is in use? Your options are A. Role-based access control, B. Mandatory access control, C. Discretionary access control, D. Attribute-based access control. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is B. Mandatory access control. B is correct because mandatory access control uses central policy that compares user clearance against resource labels and denies users the ability to override decisions. Classified government environments are the canonical use case. A is wrong because role-based access control groups permissions by job function and does not require clearance labels or central override prohibitions. C is wrong because discretionary access control allows owners to grant access at their discretion, which contradicts the rule that users cannot override decisions. D is wrong because attribute-based access control evaluates many attributes per request. While powerful, it is not specifically defined by clearance levels and labels. Mandatory access control is the model where a central authority sets access policies that no individual user can override. Understanding why it works this way, and how it differs from other models, is the key concept behind this question. Every resource carries a classification label, and every user carries a clearance level. The system automatically compares the two and makes the access decision. Neither the user nor the resource owner has any say in the outcome. Think of it as two columns, one for user clearance, one for resource labels. The system sits above both and enforces the rules automatically. A user with secret clearance can access secret and confidential materials, but the system blocks any attempt to reach top secret. The critical distinction examiners test is centrality. Discretionary access control lets owners decide who to share with. Role-based access control uses job function roles. Attribute-based control is broader and flexible. Only mandatory access control places every decision outside the reach of users and administrators alike. Whenever an exam scenario describes access decisions driven by centrally enforced labels and clearances, with no ability for users to grant exceptions, that is mandatory access control. Labels alone or clearances alone are not enough. It is the combination with strict central enforcement that makes it mandatory. Question 46. A new information technology director wants to formalize how the organization handles passwords, acceptable use of company devices, and incident reporting. The director publishes a document that defines mandatory rules in each area and assigns responsibility for enforcement. What kind of document has been published? Your options are A. Security policy, B. Threat intelligence report, C. Penetration test scope agreement, D. Incident response runbook. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is A. Security policy. A is correct because a security policy is a formal management document that defines mandatory rules across security topics and assigns responsibilities for enforcement. The director's publication matches this definition. B is wrong because a threat intelligence report describes external threat activity. It does not set internal mandatory rules. C is wrong because a penetration test scope agreement defines the boundaries of an authorized test. It is not an organization-wide rule set. D is wrong because an incident response runbook gives step-by-step procedures for a specific incident type. It is narrower than a comprehensive policy. A security policy is a formal governance document that establishes mandatory rules for how an organization manages security. It assigns responsibilities, specifies consequences for violations, and serves as the authoritative reference for expected behavior across employees, contractors, and partners. A well-written policy translates abstract security goals into concrete obligations. Regulators and auditors, including frameworks like ISO and NIST, expect documented policies as evidence that security is treated as a governance matter, not just a technical one. Security policies sit at the top of a documentation hierarchy. Policies state high-level rules. Standards specify technical requirements that satisfy those rules. Procedures give step-by-step instructions. Guidelines offer recommended but non-mandatory practices. The key distinction exam writers test is the difference between a policy and the documents that implement it. A policy says multi-factor authentication is required. A standard names acceptable methods. A procedure describes how to enroll someone. A guideline suggests password best practices. When a scenario describes a written document that establishes mandatory security rules and assigns enforcement responsibility, that is the security policy concept being tested. Procedures, runbooks, and audit findings all operate beneath it. Question 47. A regional health system handles electronic protected health information and must implement safeguards across administrative, physical, and technical categories, along with breach notification rules when patient data is exposed. Which regulation governs these requirements? Your options are A. Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, B. General Data Protection Regulation, C. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, D. Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right to you? The correct answer is C. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. C is correct because the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act governs the protection of electronic protected health information in the United States, mandates administrative, physical, and technical safeguards, and requires breach notification. The scenario fits this regulation precisely. A is wrong because the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard governs payment card data, not health records. B is wrong because the General Data Protection Regulation governs personal data of European Union residents. It is not the primary regulation for United States health records. D is wrong because the Sarbanes-Oxley Act governs financial reporting and internal controls at public companies, not health information. HIPAA is the United States federal law governing the protection of electronic protected health information. Enacted in 1996, it established uniform national standards where none previously existed, ensuring patients have a consistent expectation of privacy regardless of which provider or state they are in. The security rule divides required protections into three categories. Administrative safeguards cover policies and workforce training. Physical safeguards secure the spaces and devices that hold data. Technical safeguards protect the data itself through encryption, authentication, and audit controls. Covered entities include health plans, clearinghouses, and providers that conduct transactions electronically. Business associates are vendors or contractors who handle protected health information on their behalf. The Department of Health and Human Services enforces compliance through investigations, corrective action plans, and financial penalties. HIPAA is frequently confused with three other major regulations. GDPR covers personal data of EU residents broadly. PCI DSS applies to cardholder payment data. Sarbanes-Oxley governs financial reporting at public companies. HIPAA alone is the uniquely U.S. federal regulation for health information privacy and security. When an exam scenario mentions electronic protected health information, covered entities, business associates, or breach notification in a U.S. healthcare context, HIPAA is the regulation being tested. Also, remember, consumer fitness tracker data is generally not covered. Scope matters. Question 48. A European-based e-commerce company collects personal data from customers across the European Union. Customers must be able to request access to their data, correct it, and have it deleted. The company must report personal data breaches to authorities within 72 hours. Which regulation defines these requirements? Your options are A. Sarbanes-Oxley Act, B. Federal Information Security Management Act, C. Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, D. General Data Protection Regulation. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is D. General Data Protection Regulation. D is correct because the General Data Protection Regulation applies to personal data of European Union residents, grants data subjects rights of access, rectification, and erasure, and requires breach notification to supervisory authorities within 72 hours. The scenario fits this regulation directly. A is wrong because the Sarbanes-Oxley Act governs financial reporting in United States public companies, not European consumer data rights. B is wrong because The Federal Information Security Management Act applies to United States federal agencies and their information systems, not European consumer e-commerce. C is wrong because the payment card industry data security standard focuses on cardholder data protection, not the broader personal data rights described. The General Data Protection Regulation is the European Union's comprehensive privacy framework, in effect since May 2018. It replaced a patchwork of inconsistent national laws with a single harmonized rule set, adding significantly stronger protections for individuals across all member states. GDPR grants data subjects powerful rights to access, correct, or delete their data, to port it elsewhere, and to object to certain uses. Organizations that experience a breach risking individuals' rights must notify the relevant supervisory authority within 72 hours of discovery. Mechanically, GDPR defines two compliance roles. A data controller decides why and how personal data is processed and bears primary responsibility. A data processor handles data on behalf of a controller under contractual obligations. The individual whose data is processed is the data subject. Both controllers and processors must implement appropriate technical and organizational measures, conduct data protection impact assessments for high-risk processing, and maintain records of processing activities. Personal data is defined broadly, including indirect identifiers like online identifiers and location data. When an exam scenario describes broad privacy protections for EU residents' personal data, GDPR is the framework. Don't confuse it with CCPA, which covers California residents, or HIPAA, which covers US health information. GDPR is uniquely the EU's privacy law. Question 49. An online merchant processes credit card payments through its website. Auditors require the company to protect cardholder data at rest and in transit, restrict access to card data on a need-to-know basis, regularly scan for vulnerabilities, and maintain a firewall configuration. Which standard governs these requirements? Your options are A. ISO 27001, B. Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, C. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, D. General Data Protection Regulation. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is B. Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. B is correct because the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard is the industry standard for protecting cardholder data, with specific requirements for encryption, access control, vulnerability scanning, and firewall configuration. The merchant's audit checklist matches these requirements. A is wrong because ISO 27001 is a broad information security management standard. While related, it does not include the specific cardholder data clauses described. C is wrong because the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act governs health data, not payment card data. D is wrong because the General Data Protection Regulation governs personal data of European Union residents and does not contain card-specific clauses. PCI DSS is the contractual security standard created by the major card brands to protect cardholder data. Unlike a law, it is enforced through contracts between card brands, acquiring banks, merchants, and service providers. Non-compliance can mean fines, higher transaction fees, or losing the ability to accept card payments entirely. The standard organizes its controls into 12 requirement areas. These cover network security, encryption of cardholder data both at rest and in transit, strict access control, vulnerability management, and ongoing logging and policy enforcement. Every requirement comes with detailed testing procedures that auditors verify. A critical concept in PCI DSS is scope. The cardholder data environment includes every system that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data, plus any system connected to it. Organizations reduce scope using tokenization, network segmentation, and outsourcing to compliance service providers because compliance cost grows directly with the size of that environment. PCI DSS is frequently confused with other frameworks. HIPAA protects health information. GDPR covers personal data of EU residents, and ISO 27001 is a broad information security management standard. PCI DSS is uniquely the card brand mandated contractual framework specifically for cardholder data protection. When an exam scenario mentions cardholder data, acquiring banks, merchant compliance, or scope reduction for payment systems, PCI DSS is the framework being tested. Remember, it is a private contractual standard, not a law enforced by the card brands themselves. Question 50. A Chief Information Security Officer is establishing a process for ongoing security planning. The framework will identify what needs protecting, choose safeguards, assess effectiveness, monitor performance, and feed lessons back into the next planning cycle. Which characteristic best describes a sound security planning framework? Your options are: A. It is a one-time activity completed during initial system design. B. It focuses primarily on perimeter controls and ignores internal threats. C. It is a continuous cycle that adapts as threats and business needs change. D. It relies on a single comprehensive technology solution. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is C. It is a continuous cycle that adapts as threats and business needs change. C is correct because a mature security planning framework operates as a continuous cycle of identifying assets, selecting controls, assessing them, monitoring performance, and incorporating lessons into the next iteration. Threats and business contexts shift, so the framework must adapt. A is wrong because security planning that ends at initial design quickly becomes outdated as systems, threats, and business needs evolve. B is wrong because ignoring internal threats leaves a major class of risk unaddressed, including insider threats and lateral movement after an external breach. D is wrong because no single technology can replace an ongoing governance framework that aligns people, process, and tools to changing conditions. A security planning framework is the structured, repeating cycle an organization uses to stay protected as threats, technology, and business priorities constantly change. Unlike a one-time project, a mature framework never truly ends. Each iteration feeds directly into the next. The cycle moves through 6 phases: identification, selection, implementation, assessment, monitoring, and improvement. After improvement, findings feed straight back into identification, starting the next iteration with updated understanding. Exam writers specifically test 3 failing alternatives, treating security as a one-time activity at system design, focusing only on perimeter controls while ignoring internal threats, and relying on a single technology product that cannot cover governance and process gaps. Industry frameworks like the NIST Risk Management Framework and ISO Information Security Management Standards both enforce cyclical implementation using plan, do, check, and act stages. This structure ensures that lessons learned from incidents and audits are always carried forward. When an exam scenario describes a recurring program with ongoing monitoring, regular reassessment, and iterative improvement, the continuous security planning framework concept is being tested. The moment security becomes a one-time effort, it starts falling behind reality.
You have reached the end of our first question set. For the free complete exam preparation, visit our website link in the description, where you find thousands more practice questions and comprehensive study guides. Thanks for studying with us today. See you in the next video.